Hey you guys, got a nice little game here and a critical endgame position that I think will be instructive. If you think you're weak on endgames and critical squares and stuff like that, check this one out because it's a good one. So my opponent's rated 1338 and I start with e4, e5, knight to c3, the Vienna game, knight to f6 and f4. So I'm playing the Vienna gambit. And my opponent here plays the very best move, which is d5. There are several weak moves here, but this is by far the best one. So I'm already thinking, I'm hoping this guy isn't using a engine, but I'm sure he's not. Okay, so because he played that move pretty quickly as well, 11 seconds. Okay, so pawn takes e5, knight takes e4, and knight to f3. This is important because this diagonal is now open for the queen and I have no f-pawn. Okay, so you've got to get your knight out. c6 protects the central d5 pawn, and d3 now to kick the knight. We have an exchange of knights. I capture with the b pawn. Well, it's the only piece to capture with, but this is common, capturing with a b pawn in the Vienna. Bishop comes out now to pin the knight. Bishop e2 breaks the pin. Queen to e7, and now I attack the queen with bishop to g5. Okay, and now we have f6. So this is slightly weakening black's king side for sure. I capture and captures, and now I have to retreat my bishop. So what would you play here as black? Because this bishop is actually pinned, so I was very much expecting black to capture the knight on f3, which would require g takes f3, resulting in an isolated pawn on the f-file, isolated pawn on the h-file. Black doesn't do that and instead develops the other bishop, but that gives me time to castle. Okay, so my king now has some safety in the corner, and my rook is now on the semi-open f-file. Bishop comes down e3 to check, and I just step away to h1. I was ready for that one. Knight comes out to d7, and now knight to d4. So I'm just generally trying to improve my knight, but this comes with an attack. We've got two attacking pieces now on this bishop, so something has to be done. Bishop takes, queen takes, and now this bishop is not exactly pinned because the queen is defended. However, should black want to castle, for example, then the bishop would be pinned because the queen would then be undefended, and that's important. We have bishop takes knight. Okay, that's not an issue. Queen takes queen, king takes queen, and now is my only blunder of the game, because I now see the opportunity for an in-between move. Right, so I've got two pieces against this pawn. The bishop is en prise, under attack. Okay, but I think wouldn't it be great to force the knight, force the king away from this pawn? Okay, so I now play rook a to e1. Now, can you see why this is a blunder? Right, the in-between move check can be important, can be very useful, can be very strong. However, the piece that I'm attacking here, the piece that is at my mercy, can technically block the check, right? So black could here have played bishop e5 and blocked the check. Okay, I did then have d4 to attack the pinned piece. So I would have probably won the bishop, but the engine says that's actually a blunder. Black doesn't spot that as an idea and sidesteps the king to f7. I grab the bishop. So now I've got these kind of ugly double pawns in the middle of the board, but double pawns do have a kind of strength to them as well, because they guard quite a few squares, right? It's just a different arrangement. Side-by-side pawns far better, but this is not a bad thing. And now we have rook a to e8. I ignore that threat and push c4. I'd love to undouble my pawns. So if d takes c4, d takes c4, and then I've got side-by-side pawns, even better, right? Rook swaps itself off. And this is kind of interesting because I posted a video recently where Material was actually equal, but I thought I had the initiative and the advantage throughout the game, but my advantage was not material. Right? My advantage was that I had early initiative and got my king safe early on. But that then turned out, because we then went into simplification, that turned out to be the wrong approach, because what we ended up with was roughly equal material, and then my king was stuck in the corner, all nice and safe, at the point in the game where we go into the ending and the kings want to become active, and my opponent had a more active king and went on to win. Right, so you have to take the appropriate course of action depending on what the imbalance is that's in your favour. Okay, and so if it's material, yes, you can simplify. If it's space, then you want to keep space. You don't want to swap off. If you've got a space advantage, it benefits the player who's being constrained and cramped to swap off, because swapping off frees up squares and frees up the control of squares, stuff like that. Okay, so this is what I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. So now b5. Now this created a little problem for me, because black's now got 2 pawns looking at this. So either way, you know, if I take there, pawn takes there, and he's got 2 pawns there and I've got double pawns. If I take there, he takes there, same thing, exact same situation. Okay, it does leave him with an isolated pawn. So in the end I decided not to do anything, and that it would actually be better to allow black to capture. So whichever pawn takes, and then if he takes again, I take with the rook. Okay, and now rook across to e8. So clearly he's not looking up e2, which is protected twice, but e1, he's probably looking at e2. Okay, so now I decide to capture here because I see an opportunity, right? And this is the thing, when you train, so I'm doing an awful lot of work at the moment on tactics and putting together my tactics course that should be coming out in the summer, right? And tactics, improving at tactics means that you need to know the tactical patterns well enough that you can just see them on the board. So one thing here that I see is a potential pin, right? The reason why, because the king and the knight are on the same line. They're on the same rank, okay? So if this pawn should disappear, I have rook c7, pinned knight, can't move, also attacking a7. Okay, so takes, rook c7, very simple. King moves forward to defend the knight, kind of makes sense. I grab the pawn. Okay, so now my pawn up, h5 is played. Now I have to activate my king, right? Key thing. These 3 squares, right? This rook would love to get onto the 7th rank. Okay. The reason why rooks like to be on the 7th rank is there's very often pawns still on the 7th rank. That's where all the pawns start the game. And generally, they won't all vacate the 7th rank. So rook, you can get 1 or even better 2 rooks on the 7th rank in the ending. Then it should be a happy hunting ground for rooks. Now, but what I want to do is I want to get my king like to this square in order to defend these 3 key squares on this open file. There are actually 2 open files on the board. There's the E file and also the C file is open. But let's say my rook can patrol one of those files. If my king can get to F2 and cover these, then life should be good. Unfortunately, black has blocked his rook's access to that open file by putting his king in the way. So it's going to take that rook 2 moves to get in there. King now moves. I throw in a check, because here I figure that, okay, my bishop's looking at this pawn, okay? Should the king move, I've got 2 attackers then on the pawn, okay? And knight can't block, because rook takes knight. King moves there, and I grab the pawn, okay? So I actually give up my option of defending these 3 key squares for the sake of material and also constraining the king. So that the king's now stuck here on these 2 ranks because of my rook that's guarding this whole 6th rank. Yeah. So we have knight takes bishop, rook takes, and I figure that at this point I'm 2 pawns in front, so simplifying now is a good thing. But you have to calculate this kind of thing. Right, now I'm very much expecting this rook to come down here. Okay, now one thing I also notice, look at that, 3 pawns all in a line. I have a rook. Rooks like lines. They like horizontal, vertical lines. Not very good at diagonals, has to be said. Very clumsy at diagonals are rooks. Okay, so what does black play? Black plays rook e3, coming after my rear doubled pawn. I might argue that actually that pawn might be more important in the game, but we shall see. Okay, so now simply rook f3. So this is an X-ray defense. This is an important tactic that you need to know. Okay, I'm attacking the rook, and through the rook I am defending the pawn behind it. So the rook now cannot capture the pawn because he'll get captured himself. So what's he going to do? Is he going to trade off? No, he's going to come to e1. Questionable, this one. e1, inviting my king to f2 square, which is where my king wanted to go all along. Happy days. Okay, now the rook's attacking a2. I now move my king, and I could have moved to like g3. Okay, but my king wants to be in the middle of the board. Right, this is the active king principle in the ending. Very, very important. So I give up the pawn, and again I offer a trade of rooks. Okay, I'm 1 pawn up, but I think that this pawn advantage here, right, 2 on 1 there, that could be decisive. I just have to be careful about this potential pass pawn here. Right, now we have an exchange of rooks, and ladies and gentlemen, this is a really key point in the game. Okay, if you struggle with endings, then this, I think, is this could almost be like an endgame puzzle, this one. And I had to think for a while. I think for 50 seconds. No, that was black thinking for 50 seconds. No, I didn't think. I thought for 3 seconds. Okay. Now, but so how do we read the board in an endgame like this? Okay, clearly this is by far black's biggest asset and threat. Okay, this pawn clearly cannot force its way past these 2 pawns. Okay, so I might think I am happy to sacrifice both of these pawns in order to eliminate that pawn, which leaves only this as a real threat. Now, you also have to think about timing. Timing becomes critical in the endgame. So if you look at that pawn there on b5 and draw a square from that pawn to its promotion square, okay, so it's 5 squares and then 5 squares 5 5, right? That creates the square. Now if the opponent's king, in this case my king on f2, can at any point enter into that square, then it can, as long as there's not traffic in the way, catch the runaway pawn. So I have to remember this. I have to stay in that pawn's square, right? So this pawn, I think, can handle itself. So what I play now is, okay, we have king d6, okay, and now h3. So this is what I figure. And it comes back again to these key doubled pawns. So look at the squares that those doubled pawns are controlling. Right, these 4. The king cannot enter into any of those squares, or there actually, because he can't obviously jump on his own piece. So what I figure is if I can get h3, g3 in, check this out. They are controlling all of those squares. So that means that this king here cannot get through on the king side of the board, right? And to get anywhere on the queen side, again, he can't go through these. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, loads. It's going to take him forever to get round here because of this blockade in the middle. So the pawn starts to run. What do I have to do? Okay, let's draw the square again. Right, there's the square. The king must be in the square. If the king can get in the square, it can stop the pawn, right? King e2. Now this king starts to come across. So what do I play? g3, right? So now 1, 2, 3, and this, and currently this and this, because the king's there. The king cannot penetrate any of those squares. Can't get in. King comes across anyway. Why? Right? You can't get through. You shall not pass. So now, I move my king across to d2 because I know that we are safe on that side of the board. King comes across to g5. So I think the only idea here is pawn goes there, pawn takes, king gobbles up the other pawn, right? But that's leaving the king here on this side of the board, far too far away from the action. That is not the critical point, right? Now, if the king could have gotten through and destroyed these pawns without losing his own pawn, then there could be a winning opportunity there. But this is a squib. This is not an attack with any hope of success. And the reason why is because of this force field, the king cannot enter first. The pawn has to enter first. And as soon as that pawn takes one step towards these pawns, it's gone. So, king c2, pawn h4, pawn takes, king b3, king takes h3. Now I grab. Okay, yeah? We go on for a few more moves, and quite important moves as well, so watch this. So, I take the opposition here, okay? 2 squares apart in a straight line. The opposition means that, because the king has a force field around it of these 8 squares, that the opponent's king cannot get into. So if I take the opposition, this king is now constrained to moving up, down, or sideways, or away from the action. Okay? Now wherever he goes, if he goes here, I'm going to go here, take the opposition. If he goes here, I'm going to go here, take the opposition again, right? Just use my force field powers to get him away. Now he goes here, I move my pawn up. Now, if you saw my video the other day on king and pawn endings, this is the next move should be very obvious to you, right? There's one best move really here that ensures victory for white, and it is to place your king a knight's move away from the enemy king in the line of where the pawn is, right? So pawn is on the d file, so I play my king to here. What this means is now king is protecting d6, d7, d8, and the pawn is about to step into d6. Okay, so it now has a completely protected channel. This king cannot get near the pawn. If it goes here, pawn there, check. King has to move away. The king cannot stop that pawn now from promoting, and then the other d pawn could promote, but I've got a king and a queen, the game is lost. Okay, so really interesting case study there on how to read the board at an ending. So you need to consider, where are the dangers? What are the critical issues? Which potential threats can you neutralize? And what does that leave? And critically, what does your king need to do? Your king becomes the most powerful piece on the board when the other pieces are off, right? And it really changes character in the ending like that. So if we go back a bit, I think to like here, Black's decision to swap off rooks, I don't think was a good one, because Black needed to calculate, how can I win this game from this position? And from here, this pawn, that's its square, right? My king's already in, okay? And Black needed to look at this. Now, if I was Black here, I don't know. I think, so what have we got? We've got 1, 2, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 moves to promote. But still for white, if we did like captures, this is still 5, 6 moves away anyway. So he might have had a chance focusing only on that pawn. But this pawn, there was no hope with this pawn, right? That pawn's job is to trip up these pawns. Nothing else. Nothing else at all. Okay, it's to slow down these pawns and hopefully give this guy time to get to the other side. That is black's only real hope. Black just went the wrong way, right? Should have bet on red, not whatever. So there you go. Interesting endgame. Hope it's been useful for you. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you later.